A Heroine's Beginning, Chapter 6. 2 years later. The manor house was in complete disarray. Mrs. Pole had ordered a large spring clean of the entire place. Everything needed to be dusted and polished from top to bottom. It had been like this for the past week. Furniture was moved, cupboards emptied, carpets beaten, silver polished, clothes aired, chimney cleaned, and every last speck of dust was to be banished from the house. As the only housemaid, it fell to me to do most of these activities. Jane had married a few months after Lady Eleanor had died, and had left the manor to live with her new husband. She was now expecting a new addition to the family. Mrs. Pole was very good at organizing what needed to be organized, but when it actually came to polishing silver or beating the carpets, she was little worse than useless. Thankfully, Miss Ella was nearly always on hand to help. She had been devastated at the sudden death of her mother, and it had taken months to get her to become her old self again. She was still kind and compassionate, but in those first few months, she hardly ever smiled. But that was all in the past, and Ella was once again the cheerful girl she had always been. The pain of her loss had turned to memory. Miss Ella was quite the cook. She spent a lot of time in the kitchen now, baking cakes and other sweet things. She could make savory dishes, but Mrs. Taylor wouldn't normally allow her to, stating that if Miss Ella continued to make all of the food in the house, she would be out of a job, and she couldn't have that. Miss Ella didn't really mind, though. She had gotten very good at making little cakes, which she called fairy cakes, as they were small. When she wasn't baking, she spent her time with me, usually sewing, but in the last few days, doing whatever task Mrs. Pole had assigned for me for the day. The reason for all the spring cleaning tasks was that Sir Henry was to be married again. He had never really recovered from his wife's passing, and while he smiled in front of Ella, I sometimes caught him in his study, hunched over some object that belonged to her, crying. I do not believe Ella ever knew this. This is why the news of Sir Henry's intention came as a huge shock to me. It was only when he explained to us about the new mistress's family did it make sense. The new mistress had 2 daughters of her own, who were both the same age as Ella. I guess Sir Henry hoped that his new wife would be a mother to Ella, and also give her some sisters to become close with. Other than me, Ella had been isolated from most other people her own age. Not intentionally, but it was how her childhood had happened. However, Ella was now 18 years old. Her childhood days were behind her, and she was now a sweet, caring, beautiful young woman, with long blonde curls and the same eyes as her mother, a soft hazel color. The wedding was to take place next week, and so Mrs. Pole had ordered the entire house be cleaned from top to bottom, with surfaces so clean you could see your reflection everywhere you went. The manor house became full of mirrors. Ella joked about how the house was now the worst place to play hide-and-seek, as you could see every angle from anywhere. We were outside beating the carpets one day, when I asked Miss Ella if she knew anything about the people who were soon to be her family. I know that Lady Agatha was an esteemed beauty in her day, and it is said that her daughter Anna takes after her. I don't know anything about Jacqueline. Father hasn't said anything about her. But do you know what they are like? I inquired. No, only that. I'm sure they're lovely, though, and Father would not marry Lady Agatha if she did not have a kind soul, and if he did not love her. I thought about this, and to me it didn't seem like Sir Henry was marrying for love at all. He had met the lady in question only a month ago, and proposed marriage almost instantly, and then returning here without her, with only a few pieces of information about her and her daughters. It was as if she was a complete stranger to him, and I had seen him since, holding tightly onto one of Lady Eleanor's necklaces and staring out of the window with unshed tears in his eyes. I know I shouldn't pry into things that didn't concern me, but I couldn't help it. I did, however, keep my thoughts to myself and did not share any of this with Miss Ella. The conversation ended, and we returned to beating the carpets. The ladies arrived the day before the wedding. We were assembled outside the front door to greet them. Mrs. Pole, Mrs. Taylor, Miss Ella, Sir Henry, and myself. There were also Daniel and Clara, my brother and sister, who had only been employed yesterday, as the family was about to more than double in size. As the carriage pulled to a halt outside the door, I couldn't help but notice how expensive it looked. The sides had been painted and varnished and kept in excellent repair. The curtains seemed to be made of red velvet, and there was a family crest carved into the main body. The wheel spokes had intricate carvings etched into them, and every available space seemed to be filled with decoration. It must have cost an absolute fortune. The door was opened by the coachman, who then pulled out the step. The curtain was pulled back, and a hand shot out. Sir Henry walked toward the carriage and took the hand, and a handsome woman stepped out. She must have been in her 40s, but she had a grace about her which made her look much younger. Her dress was very well made and fashionable, pulled in at her waist and made from a dark red muslin. Her hair was elaborately knotted high on her head, and mostly obscured from view by a very large hat, which was just as ornately decorated as the carriage. She did not smile, only raised her eyebrows when she saw the house. Her piercing blue eyes surveyed all that was around her, but not as though she were looking around a new home, but some inconvenience that must be endured. All the female servants curtsied, and Daniel bowed out of respect to the new mistress, but she did not even glance our way. With her head held high, she strutted right past us, and even Miss Ella, without much of a thought. Another lady stepped out of the carriage, assisted by Sir Henry. She was much younger than the first one, but just as handsome. Her blonde hair secured firmly with the most complicated hairstyle I had ever seen in my life. There were large braids and smaller braids knotted together, and what seemed to be ribbons and bejeweled pins weaving in and out of the design. It looked hideous. The lady herself behaved exactly the same as her mother, parading right past us with her head held so high I thought she might hurt the muscles in her neck. The final lady to step out of the carriage, however, was different from the other two. She wore a simple dress of dark blue, no fancy ornaments or patterns. Her hair was left down, so much so that it covered half of her face. She followed the other two ladies, but stopped before us and gave us a small incline of her head. I smiled. At least this young lady had some manners. A shrill voice started speaking, and the young lady hurried off after it. "So this is your simple abode?" the uncomfortably shrill voice asked. "Yes, this is my home," Sir Henry replied, looking around the place fondly and walking into the house. "And where is this daughter you speak so highly of?" the older woman inquired. Miss Ella's face burned bright red at this. She smiled shyly and followed her father into the house. "Here is Ella," Sir Henry said, a hint of pride in his voice. Ella sped up to stand alongside him. The older woman's face dropped when she saw Ella, and her eyes widened. It was a moment before she composed herself again and greeted Ella. "Oh, of course you are, my dear. I'm so sorry I did not recognize you. You were, after all, standing next to the riffraff. Of course you're Henry's daughter." My mind raced at this. She had the audacity to call us riffraff? How dare she? But my mouth remained shut. There was no use getting angry at the new mistress for something so trivial. "Do you mean my friends?" Miss Ella asked politely. The older woman seemed shocked and looked at Sir Henry. "Oh, my dear, I know you said you were a little isolated out here, but I never thought you meant you were so far out of society to have your daughter consort with servants." The more she spoke, the less I liked her. Ella was clearly mortified. The blonde-haired young woman glared at me and spoke. "You there, help me with my cloak." I made my way over to her and began unfastening the fancy pin that held her cloak together. When it was released, she shrugged it off and left it to pool on the floor. She gave me no time to catch it. She walked away to join her mother without so much as a thank you. I decided I also did not like her. The mother spoke again. "This is my daughter, the Lady Anna Kingston," she said, gesturing to the blonde lady. "And this is Jacqueline," she informed Sir Henry and Miss Ella, with an incline of her head. Lady Jacqueline stood at the side of the room, her face still covered, not really looking at anything. "Well, you've already met Ella," Sir Henry began. "Let me introduce you to the household. This is Miss "No need to introduce them now," the older woman interrupted. "There will be plenty of time for that later. Now, if someone could please show us to our rooms, we've had a very long journey." Mrs. Pole looked a little put out by this clear snub. She had put a lot of effort into making everything ready for their arrival, only to be ignored. Sir Henry looked a little annoyed as well, but he was trying his best to hide it. He glanced at me and said, "Please show them the way, Marion." I made my way past the older woman and began to climb the stairs, the three of them trailing behind me. Ella caught their attention by saying, "Excuse me, but what am I to call you?" Her eyes looked up at the older woman with innocence. She still believed the best in people. "You may call me Lady Kingston," she said curtly. "But after the wedding tomorrow, surely you will then be Lady Cecil," Ella replied. "Could I not call you Agatha or Lady Agatha?" "Certainly not," Lady Kingston exclaimed. "I will not be referred to so informally." She glared at Ella, but then softened her gaze slightly. "You will call me Lady Kingston for now," she said, with a small smile on her lips that did not extend to the rest of her face. She swiftly turned back around and began once again to follow me up the stairs, leaving Ella looking a little hurt. When we reached the hallway, Lady Kingston and Lady Anne began discussing the decoration of the house and how it needed to be repainted and new carpets put down and different, more modern chandeliers. I bit my tongue. I thought the house was very nicely decorated. It felt comfortable and homey, not cold and uninviting like the new fashionable house I heard Sir Henry talk about. And the chandeliers, although fairly small and simple, were still a nightmare to clean. So if they wanted to have new ones, they were very welcome to clean them themselves. I kept walking in silence until we reached the mistress's bedroom. I opened the door for them, and they walked right past me. A sort of shriek emitted from Lady Kingston's mouth. "It's so small!" The room was not small. There was plenty of space for a large bed, writing desk, armchair, sofa, fireplace, basin, wardrobe, and shelves, and still some room left over for a small bed to be placed on the floor if a servant needed to sleep in the room, or a child. My own room was about the fifth of the size of this room, and it housed 2 people. I stared at them incredulously. I was liking this new family less and less. Once they had stopped complaining over the lack of space and basic needs, Lady Anna demanded to be shown her room. I led her and Jacqueline down the hallway and around the corner to the last remaining bedroom. It had been the guest room, but was converted to accommodate 2 people. The room was definitely smaller than the mistress's room. Lady Anna jumped half a mile when she saw it. Jacqueline did not say anything. "I did not know we'd be sharing," Lady Anna said, the rage evident in her voice. She turned on me and demanded to have her own room, and one that was more spacious. Her eyes almost looked aflame. I held my head up and said directly at her, "I'm sorry, but we have no more rooms, and if you want to move, you will have to take it up with the master." My eyes did not leave hers for some time. She eventually broke the stare and marched back down the corridor to her mother's room. Jacqueline hadn't moved from her spot. She mumbled some words I could not hear and hurried off after her sister. I wasn't exactly sure what to think of Miss Jacqueline. I did not dislike her like I did the rest of her family, but she had not been particularly warm to anyone either. She just refrained from interacting with people. I decided it was not my place to pass judgment on this new family. They would be the ones paying me for my services, so I should try not to think too harshly of them. I returned to the kitchen, and the atmosphere was not very positive. Mrs. Pole clearly did not like the new family much, and Ella did not look particularly happy either. My sister Clara stood at the sink, trying to get the grime off a pot with a considerable amount of force. Mrs. Taylor was cooking, but she wasn't humming to herself like she normally was. Daniel had not returned yet from unloading the carriage. Everyone looked downcast. Miss Ella looked to see me come through the door, and her face lifted slightly. "Did they like their rooms?" she asked optimistically. "No, they did not," I replied. "I fear they find their new lodgings too confining." "But Lady Kingston has the largest room in the house." "I know, but they did not like it very much." "Oh dear, I know the guest room is a little small for 2 people, but I thought the mistress's room would be more than adequate." We were interrupted by a loud shout from upstairs. This was unusual. We could not normally hear what was happening in the rest of the house from the kitchen. It sounded like Lady Anna was showing her mother the room she was expected to inhabit. Miss Ella rose from where she was sitting and moved toward the door. "I think I should go and assist Father," she told us with a smile. "There's a lot to do before the wedding. Maybe they are only acting like this because they are nervous, or this move was a very large change, and they just need some time to adjust." I wish I had her faith in people. Something told me they would not improve over time, but it was not my place to say anything. I just had to hope I was wrong.